and welcome to my easy to understand guide to the music video 17 Going Under by Sam Fender. This music video is going to be particularly relevant for you if you are studying Eduqas A-level media studies, as it is one of the set texts for study on that specification for exams from 2024 onwards. This video is going to focus in particular on representation. In the video, it starts with an establishing shot of quite an urban looking street, terraced houses, and that creates this representation immediately, quite a recognisable shared conceptual roadmap, if you're looking at the Stuart Hall's theory, of a working class area. The close-up of the singer singing to the camera is quite conventional, and that is very engaging to an audience. It represents him as being quite important. There's a slow motion shot here of a woman and a child, and it's framed quite loosely. There's the coast and nature as the kind of settings in the background. And that kind of represents this idea of them being quite free. There's a lot of space around them. They're not trapped in the frame. So we're getting this kind of contrast between the urban areas that are more kind of trapped and crowded and claustrophobic, and the outdoor nature areas, which are much looser and freer. There's a montage of shots which is quite hard to identify all the elements of here. So for example, there's a beach, there's some people walking, there's a car. The narrative is quite unclear and it's quite open to interpretation here. The wide angle of the singer here, in amongst the crowd, he is facing the camera and the rest of the crowd is facing the water. And so it kind of represents him as going against the crowd, being different, standing out. And it also makes him seem quite isolated and alone as well. The shots of him driving make him seem quite sad, quite pensive and thoughtful. We get some fast-paced shots of a kind of nightclub scene, lots of feet, lots of spinning camera work here, and it seems quite frantic. And perhaps this kind of adds to this representation of life and his life as being quite chaotic. There's not a lot of emotion on his face, and perhaps this idea of adds to how we often see masculinity and men in the media. You know, there's this kind of quite toxic idea that men shouldn't show any emotion, they shouldn't cry, and so we'll often see that in representations like this. Some of the lyrics actually draw attention to the way that men are often encouraged to repress their emotions, and they tend to focus on things like mental health as well. So you can see here a lot of mention of his emotions and feeling like he was spiraling and wanting to cry. So there's quite a lot of focus in the lyrics on aspects of masculinity and mental health. There are some female characters in the music video, and there's quite a lot of seemingly close relationships, love, hand-holding, hugging, etc. So making it feel perhaps as though women have more emotional connections to each other. However, there are also scenes of women fighting, and so perhaps challenging some gender conventions in these scenes and showing that, you know, struggle is a universal thing, not just for men, not just for women, but something that everyone goes through, particularly perhaps in these areas of England. His costume here, it feels quite kind of dingy and depressing because of its colour, but it also has a logo on it for Crown, which is a brewery, and so it kind of feels quite utilitarian, like a uniform. And actually Sam Fender worked in a pub when he was a lot younger, before he was discovered as an artist, and so perhaps this represents part of his own identity. He's representing himself here, and also representing the idea that you know, this is clearly a very working class area where everyone has to have a job, multiple jobs, often very low paying jobs. Then we get this shot that tracks around the singer, and suddenly he's actually higher than the rooftops on the screen. So it's quite unusual, quite surreal, but it represents him as literally being kind of rising up, almost in a kind of religious symbolism here, rising above his background. Somebody perhaps the audience can look up to, somebody that he looks up to himself. You know, he is confident and now admires the kind of person that he is. So this kind of low angle of him up in the air kind of really represents him as being more powerful and dominant and a role model. There's lots of low-key lighting which adds to this representation of life being quite sad and dark and difficult. There's desaturation of quite a lot of the shots in the street, which makes it feel quite kind of grimy, depressing as well. And that adds to this sense of kind of gritty reality. Whereas the shots of the coast and the outdoor nature scenes are a lot warmer and more colourful in nature. And that helps them to feel more happy and free and positive. So overall, working classes within the video are shown as people that are unfortunately living in poverty, people who are fighting against a variety of struggles, people who are bored. And this is perhaps because Sam Fender himself comes from North Shields, which is, politically, somewhere that is often in quite a lot of poverty. There's quite a lot of poverty within the area. It's also somewhere that is often very underrepresented within the music and industry. And you can see the northern elements of him within the video. So he sings in a kind of northern accent. He uses some slang within the video. So for example, the word canny, busies, knout and chanter. Using words that perhaps are colloquialisms within his particular area. So really trying to represent the northern part of England, because it's often not represented at all in the music industry in particular. Showing perhaps the gritty reality of what it's like to live in a place that does have quite a lot of poverty. We see shots of people with bloodied knuckles and eyes, and we get these close-ups on this, and this makes it feel quite dramatic and almost quite scary and like perhaps quite an aggressive place. Young people in the music video are often represented in fairly stereotypical ways. They're quite bored, they don't have anything to do. We see them going to clubs, we see them getting into fights, we see them, in relationships. There's, fairly conventional parts of teenage or young adult life within the video. And that perhaps makes it quite relatable for an audience. Several of the very fast-paced montages are quite disturbing, and they almost make it feel as though the people in the shots are on drugs. Now, Sam Fender grew up around a big community of drug takers and drug dealers, and he's done several interviews saying he really did feel tempted into that community at many times in his life. So perhaps representing young people, in particular young people living in poverty, as being surrounded by and tempted by a drug lifestyle. If you look at the way women are represented within the video, we do see a mother character within the video, and there's kind of crumpled letters on the table. There's also a bottle of gin. So perhaps representing her as being perhaps maybe a neglectful parent, somebody who is drowning out her sorrows, struggling with addiction, which again perhaps ties in with the representation of class as well, and the struggles that a lot of women have when they come from deprived backgrounds. If you have a look at the lyrics that go over these shots of the mother, there's very clear references to the debt that his mum suffered as a kid, to the issues that she had surrounding the Department of Work and Pensions and Benefits. And this really represents this idea of the Department of Work and Pensions and the government as being totally uncaring and unhelpful. For a woman clearly in need of help and support, the letters show that she didn't get any support or help, and that she's kind of drunk herself into oblivion. This distrust and this representation of the government in quite a negative fashion is fairly reflective of Sam Fender's own experiences in his youth and in his past, particularly northern areas of Britain, very distrustful of the government, because time and time again the government have issued spending cuts to northern areas of Britain, and that has resulted in a huge increase in things like poverty and unemployment and a lack of support. And so perhaps that is why Sam Fender is representing the government, the Department of Work and Pensions in this negative, unhelpful fashion. Of course, these kind of quite bleak, gritty representations are also quite conventional of the genre. The indie genre is fairly typical for having quite gritty, bleak representations. So that was my easy to understand guide to this music video. Don't forget to check out my channel for other videos that are going to be relevant for you. And if you would like a video that I don't already have, just leave a little comment below and I'll see what I can do.